The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from Seeker After Truth by Idries Shah. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. Part 8. The Skill That Nobody Has. 12 Tales. The Skill That Nobody Has. There was, in far-off times, a youth who lived near a small town in a mighty empire. He was bright and intelligent, and he impressed everyone with his ability to learn and his good neighborliness. He lived with his widowed mother. One day his mother said to him, "Anwar," for this was his name, "Anwar, you should really be thinking about settling down in life. True, you help the farmers like other lads. I know that you sit at home and make baskets like other people when there is nothing else to do. But you should either get married or set forth to seek your fortune in the wider world. At any rate, that is what I think about things." "My dear mother," cried the boy, "that is exactly what I want to do. I could stay at home and work permanently for one of the farmers, or I could go and try something really reckless, like traveling to very distant parts. But before attempting anything like that, I have made up my mind that I shall both stay fairly near to home and also become someone of importance. I shall marry the daughter of the emperor and live happily ever after." "People like us," said the old lady, "do not usually have such ideas. Why, hardly any of us ordinary working folk has ever seen the emperor, much less his daughter. And who are you, may I ask, to go to our monarch and ask such an outrageous thing?" "I, mother, am nobody to do so," said the youth. "But you, now, that is another matter. I want you to go to the emperor and ask for the princess for a daughter-in-law." We can well imagine how the poor old thing felt. The boy Anwar was, it is true, the apple of her eye, but surely he was showing far too much recklessness and even rudeness in having such ambitions. "Nonsense," she said, and set him to do so much work that for a time he forgot his plan. Then something reminded him again. He badgered his mother until she gave up, packed a bag with a few essentials, and made her way to the capital of the empire. Day after day the poor woman loitered near the palace, where she saw the glittering guard ride forth, the embassies from far-off lands arrive and depart, the towering walls behind which sat, in his throne room, the emperor himself. There was plenty of excitement in the streets, as there always is in a capital city. Processions and people of importance were everywhere, and both of them, in their own proper place, were for the edification of the people. But how does one actually get into the presence of such a person as an emperor? She tried and tried and tried. Then she thought, "If the emperor won't let me go to him, I must wait until he comes to me." So she stationed herself day and night outside the great mosque to which the emperor rode, on a white horse, to pray on Fridays. There was always a large crowd there, but after a time the old woman became known as the one who sat at a certain point. She chose this spot because it was just where the ruler turned his horse after mounting it. One Friday, then, she was sitting quietly in her usual position, when, as the emperor put his foot into the stirrup and glanced in her direction, she raised her hands in supplication. "Have that woman brought to the palace," ordered the monarch as soon as he saw her gesture. In a few minutes she was beside him in the throne room. "You are a poor woman, as I can see," said his Majesty, "and you had better speak if you seek a boon from me." But the woman was so awestruck by the place, and by being actually talking to the great man, that, although she opened her mouth, no sound came forth from it. So the emperor ordered that she be given a bag of gold and shown the door. "These people can always do with money," he said to his courtiers. When the old lady returned home, her son said, "Did you see the emperor?" "Indeed I did, Anwar." "Did you appeal to him?" "I did." "Did you enter his presence?" "Yes." "And what did he say to my proposal of marriage to his daughter, the Princess Salma?" "Foolish boy! How could I, dressed in rags and without any of the manners of the court, say a thing like that? I said nothing, for I was overcome with the splendor of the place. But His Imperial Majesty was more than kind, and has given us this bag, heavy with gold. You can use it to set yourself up in trade. That will give you a career and a lifetime's fulfillment. Forget all this nonsense about princesses." "Mother, I don't want gold. I want the princess," said Anwar. He continued to pester her until she was forced to set off once again to the capital. There the emperor saw her again, sitting in her corner. He called her to him and again asked her what she wanted. Again she was too frightened to speak. Again he gave her a bag of gold and sent her away. And the same thing happened when she returned to her humble cottage, with Anwar not at all reconciled after all the emperor's kindness. Finally, Anwar said to his mother, "I have decided not to stay at home. I have decided not to accept the comfortable life which the gold would give me. I have decided to seek the emperor's daughter, and I shall therefore set off tomorrow morning to find out how I can win her." The next day, as dawn broke, he left the house and started to walk along the road, through the woods. As the road turned at the top of a hill, Anwar came across a wise man, sitting by the way, with a pointed cap on his head, his robe made up of small squares of rag carefully stitched together. "Peace upon you, your presence the dervish," said Anwar politely. "And what do you seek, little brother?" asked the dervish. "I am seeking the way in which I can approach the emperor and ask for the hand of his daughter in marriage, for I have set my heart upon it," said Anwar. "That is difficult," said the wise man, "unless you are first prepared to learn the skill that nobody has." "How can there be such a thing if it is called the skill that nobody has?" asked the youth. "Nobody has it because people do it," said the dervish, "and they can only do it when they have something, some other things. When they have the things, the skill works for them, so they don't really have to have it." "This is extremely difficult," said Anwar, "but can you tell me how to go about it?" "Yes, indeed," said the old man. "You keep straight on, allowing nothing to deflect you, sticking with the same road, and not thinking that anything is more important than the road." Anwar thanked the dervish and went on his way. The road led him on, and he lived as best he could on wild fruits, roots, and berries, and the kindness of various people whom he met. From time to time, people suggested that he should take up employment with them, or interest himself in their crafts and occupations, or even marry their daughters. But Anwar kept on, although after a very long time he began to feel more and more that the road was leading nowhere at all. And then, one day, as it was coming to nightfall, Anwar saw that the road did indeed end. That is to say, instead of passing a certain towering fortress, it led straight within the walls through a wide gate. Anwar followed it in. The gatekeeper challenged him. "What do you seek?" "I am in search of the princess, whom I am determined to marry," answered Anwar. "You cannot pass, unless you have a more reasonable object than that," shouted the guardian of the gate, and he levelled a sharpened spike at poor Anwar. Anwar said, "Well then, I am going to learn the skill that nobody has." "That's different," said the guard, lowering his weapon. "But," he added sulkily, "someone must have told you about it, because people usually imagine that they can approach the princess direct." Anwar went on his way and found himself inside the grounds of an enormous castle. In a small pavilion in the grounds was a silent figure sitting in contemplation. As Anwar approached him, he saw that it was the very same dervish whom he had met on the road those many moons ago. "As you have arrived here at last without taking any notice of the temptations of the road," said the dervish, "you may undergo the next test." He showed Anwar into a long, low meditation hall, where rows of silent dervishes were reposing, their heads on their knees. Anwar sat down. Then the dervishes started to perform exercises, and Anwar found himself compelled to emulate them. When this was over, he was assigned to the master gardener and made to work, digging and hoeing, watering and pruning, tending plants and cutting paths, until his hands were as sore as his back ached. And all this continued for many months. Next, he was taken to the room of the master of the monastery, and had to go there every day for hours on end, while the great man looked at him, saying nothing. This continued for many more months. After that, Anwar was assigned to the kitchens, where he worked like a slave, preparing food for the hundreds of dervishes who lived in the precincts, and for the people who constantly visited the monastery, as well as for the many festivals which were conducted by the brethren. At times Anwar felt that he was being useful, at other times that he was wasting his own time, for he thought constantly about the princess, and also about the skill that nobody has. But worse still lay before him. That was when he had no work at all to do. He was not invited to take part in the dervishes' exercises. He had no place in the kitchens, and he was not wanted in the gardens. Many other young men came and went. Most of them seemed happy enough, but in conversations with them he could not learn much about the community and what the meaning was of its activities, indeed whether there was any meaning at all. Then, one day, after some years, Anwar was called into the presence of the master of the monastery. As he reached the hujra, the room where the master interviewed people, he saw that the old man was about to fall into a well which suddenly opened up in the middle of the floor. Anwar just managed to save him. "My son," said the sage, handing him a key, "take this key and look after it with your life." Anwar went on working at the monastery until he was called into the presence of the chief of the gardeners, and he saw that a tree was toppling and was about to fall on that sage's head. Anwar just managed to prevent that happening and save the man's life. "My son," said the head gardener, "take this crystal pebble and guard it with your life." He went back to work and was called, after a very long time, to the presence of the chief of the kitchens. When he got there, he saw that the man was about to lift a burning hot ladle from a pot on the fire. Anwar snatched it first and was burned on the thumb. "My son," said the chief of the kitchens, "you will now have a callus at the base of that thumb. Guard it with your life." After many more months in the monastery, Anwar was called into the assembly hall, where all the dervishes were sitting having dinner. At the head of the table sat a haughty prince, with a very superior mien and dressed in glorious robes. As everyone listened, the prince told a long and complicated story. As if it were within him, Anwar heard the prince's voice say, "Remember this story and guard it with your life." Many days after this, Anwar was told to go to the place in the garden where he had first seen the dervish. When he got there, the old man was sitting as before, in contemplation. Raising his head, he said, "Anwar, you are now ready to continue with your quest. You will succeed, for I have given you the skill that nobody has." "But I do not understand it," said Anwar. "If you think that you do," said the sage, "you do not. If, on the other hand, you think that you do not, you can exercise it without interference." "I still do not understand," said Anwar. "If you had left us, you would never have learnt," said the dervish. "And if I drive you out, you will learn. If you try to come back, you will not learn. If you need help, I will appear." "Why is that?" asked Anwar in some confusion. "Because apart from certain things which you have, I am a part of the skill, which cannot stay with you, so it has to be kept in me." So Anwar set off towards the gate of the fortress, and as he came up to the guardian of the entrance and looked at his face, he saw that he was the same man as the dervish who had been talking to him. Just outside stood the chief of the gardens, the head of the kitchen, and the chief of the monastery, and all other people whom he had met since he entered the place. Each and every one of them had the face of the dervish whom he had first met on the roadside near the top of the hill after he had left his mother's cottage. "I shall never be able to understand this," Anwar said to himself. But he continued on his way. When he looked back, he saw that the monastery was no longer there, and even the road before him had changed. Instead of leading back towards his own home, it ran in a completely different direction. Anwar continued along it nonetheless. After many days he came upon a huge and brilliantly lit city, and asked what it was. "This," said a passer-by, "is the capital of the empire, no less." Anwar asked him how many years had passed since the year in which he had set out, and the man looked at him oddly. "Why, only a single year," he said. By Anwar's own reckoning, he had spent more than 30 years in that monastery, so he realized that in some strange way time was not the same everywhere. In the center of the city, Anwar came across a deep well, and heard cries coming from it. A rope ran down into the well, and he started to haul it up. A crowd gathered as he was straining with his utmost strength, and he almost let the rope go, but he was able to sustain the terrible chafing through the callus on his thumb. Finally, a man emerged from the well. He thanked Anwar and said, "You must be the man from afar, about whom it is prophesied that he alone will be able to save me. I am the chief minister of His Imperial Majesty, imprisoned in the well by a genie, and I will see that you are rewarded." So saying, he went his way. Anwar was still rather surprised by this when a strange and fearsome figure jumped upon him. "Aha!" it said, "Son of man, you are my prey, and I shall eat you alive as I do everyone in this city whom I desire to devour. We genies are in control of the streets of the capital, and nobody can resist us except people who have earned the crystal pebble of Suleiman, son of David, which binds all the genies on earth." Hearing this, Anwar snatched the pebble crystal from his pocket and held it before the genie, who immediately dissolved into flashes of fire and scuttled away, far into the distance. No sooner had he done this than a man on horseback came galloping up to him and said, "I am the Emperor's herald. It has been foretold that anyone who can rescue the minister may be able to overcome the genies. Such a man may well have earned the key to the enchanted room in which the princess is imprisoned. The man who can open that door is to be her husband, and to rule the realm when his imperial majesty is no more." Anwar mounted behind him, and they sped to the palace. The man took him to a room where Anwar fitted the key to the lock. The door swung open, and there he saw the most beautiful lady whom human eyes had ever beheld. It was, of course, the princess, and she came forward, and the pair fell in love the instant their eyes met. And so it was that Anwar, the poor boy from the cottage in a remote province, became the husband of the Princess Salma, and emperor too in the fullness of time. And he and his consort are reigning there yet. The story which the haughty prince at the monastery table told them, they found, contained all the elements for a just, peaceful, and successful rule. And whenever they, their country, or their children were faced with any difficulties, they found that they had the skill that nobody has, for they were able to use their experience, the magical objects given to them, and the advice of the mysterious Dervish, who always appeared and advised them when they needed him. This podcast is copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.